Welcome to yet another episode of the recording of the Self-Employed Life podcast behind the scenes. So this is your opportunity, and this is content you're going to want to get for everybody else. This episode as a podcast will not be out until I think August 25th or so. So you've got a couple months advantage here to get this amazing content from Mike Michalowicz today that everybody else doesn't get. Plus, you might encounter some flubs, and that's always kind of fun too.
That's the best part.
Yeah, exactly. So you get the behind the scenes look. All right, so let's get ready to do this. Imagine taking a 4-week vacation from your business. I know even the thought of it might put you into a brief panic, but imagine it not only being possible, imagine it being the best thing for your business, and it probably is. Imagine your business might even grow without you. It takes a plan, and that plan is called Clockwork, which is why we're talking today to Mike Michalowicz. Mike just released the revised and expanded version of Clockwork, Design Your Business to Run Itself. Now, if you don't know Mike, and I'm not quite sure how that's possible, but Mike's mission is to eradicate entrepreneurial poverty. And one of the ways he does that is by helping us to design our businesses to run without us, to clockwork our business. Mike has devoted his life to the research and delivery of innovative, impactful entrepreneurial strategies. On a mission to serve us entrepreneurs and self-employed, he has created perennial top-selling books, including The Pumpkin Plan, Clockwork, Fix This Next, Get Different, and Profit First. With over 1 million readers remaining on Amazon's bestseller list, get this, after 8 years. Mike is a popular main stage keynote speaker on innovative entrepreneurial topics, speaking to thousands of audience members. Today, he hangs out with us. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for having me.
I think you may have broken a record. I'd have to go back, but I don't know that we've ever had anybody on the show as many times as you. But that's because you're that good and you put out such amazing books.
No, because I'm soliciting that much. Hey, Jeffrey, can you do me a favor?
No, but you actually don't.
I'm trying to sling books.
You don't have to.
I know.
The cool thing is, Mike, honestly, and I've read so many of your books, I had never read the original Clockwork. So this was really awesome for me to get to read this expanded and revised version.
This is the revised expanded edition right here. I mean, this is literally the galley copy. So the book goes into the marketplace in August, but this just came in today, which is the
wow, awesome
galley copy. But what's interesting, I think I surprised my publisher with when I did a revised and expanded edition, is they said, "Oh, can you do it in 3 months?" I'm like, no, like this has to be a full rewrite. They would know what my editor told me is most people do a revised and expanded edition. They front load a new story or two. They backload something and everything else is the same. So it's about 10% change. This is 60% new content, 100% rewrite, meaning literally every sentence was scrutinized and modified and changed when appropriate to flow better. And the idea was to simplify the system. And knock on wood, we're very blessed to have hundreds, actually now a few thousand people have gone through our Clockwork training experience. And we took all that feedback and said, oh, these concepts that I shared before weren't fluid or it caused questions or challenges. So we smoothed out a lot of the framework. The essence of it stays the same, but it is a much simpler process, I think, today than it was.
I would imagine. I mean, I said I didn't read the original, but this is a doable framework. Like this is implementable in a pretty short period of time. Yeah. Now, I'll tell you, probably as I analyze myself listening to you, probably the reason why I didn't read the original version, having read so many of your books, is my resistance to it, which I want to hit that right up front with anybody else, because especially here on the Self-Employed Life, a lot of people that are, solo practitioners, their businesses of one, and they are thinking, well, how can I take a month off, right? As I said, that's the goal. How can I take a month off if I'm a coach or I'm a photographer or my talent is contingent on the business? So let's hit that head on. How can they, even if their talent, they are the deliverable, how can they take a month off?
Yeah. So it starts off with, instead of saying, how can I take a month off? The question is, when will I take a month off? Because we all will. It will be by choice or thrusted upon us. And sadly, it's a thrust upon us. Hopefully you never experience an illness or a family member that needs your attention or something that prevents you from doing work, but it happens often. But even if you circumnavigate that, the day you want to retire or leave your business is the day you start that vacation. And many businesses then have no value beyond the activity of the self-employed operator. And therefore the business is not even liquidated. It gets abandoned. And that's a shame. So the idea of a 4-week vacation is not for the owner, the self-employed person to get a vacation. It's about the business getting a vacation from them.
Yeah.
So I want to change that paradigm. The um, the idea behind how the 4-week vacation came about, and this is the premise of the book, is that if anyone can leave their business for 4 consecutive weeks in almost every business, that means that that every element of that business is going to be touched on in their absence. Bring on new prospects, serving those prospects, doing the work, editing the photographs, whatever the work is that you do has to be done. So what we do with this 4-week vacation is we say, okay, I'm going to commit to this 2 years out, whatever. We put the line in the sand. Then with reverse calculate, how do we make it happen? And you and I were talking offline. This was 2 days ago now, but we were talking about when you're self-employed, it doesn't mean you're solo employed. And that's why you have a disdain for the term solopreneur, because
Yeah.
it sounds like you're abandoned or by yourself. But we're surrounded by opportunities to engage contractors, virtual help. We don't even think about vendors. Like that software vendor of yours is a provider to you. They're part of the team.
100%.
Even your clients are part of the team. Sometimes they do the work. When I order something online, I'm typing in the data about my shipping information. I'm doing the work to receive it. So we start thinking about automation. We start thinking about how we can engage vendors and contractors. Now, I'm doing the reading for this right now, and the producer, his name's Scott Cresswell, for my book, he is also self-employed. We are talking about this, and he goes, I can never take a 4-week vacation. I do everything. And so my response to him was, well, let's start fractionalizing you. You do everything, but what are those everythings? Let's break that into pieces. We're not looking for someone or something to replace all of you. What parts of you can we start replacing? So we start narrowing you down to simply your core competency. And it's interesting. I have a story in this book about a painter, a solo painter. His name is Peter Lely. He's from England, and he was back in the 1600s. Who was self-employed. He was a solo painter. He became the most prolific painter of the 1600s, producing thousands of portraits when his contemporaries only produced hundreds in their lifetime. So the question is, how did he do it? Well, what he did was he honed in, he fractionalized himself and said, well, I do this, I do that. But the thing I do best is actually painting faces. Back then, these portraits, they were murals.
Right.
They took up an entire wall. You paint the face, but you'd also paint the body, the clothing, the background. 95% of the time was all the elements, 5% was the face. So what he did was he painted, it was like 10 backgrounds. He painted 4 body types in different clothing and put that in his studio. He would then, when he was commissioned, he'd paint the face of a person, draw it out, paint it, and then take the painting back to the studio and have his apprentices finish it off. And he would say, hey, throw on, let's do body type 2, background 6. It was paint by numbers.
Brilliant. Yeah.
And we can do the same.
Yeah.
As a self-employed business owner, determine what is the core competency, the extraordinary excellence that you deliver. What's that 5% that makes all the difference? Let's hone in on that. And when you do that and you outsource, you leverage others to do the rest, you'll find you can take these 4-week vacation blocks and the business, the core competency of the business isn't dependent upon you. You're just doing the one part of excellence.
Yeah. And I think, your point about it being 4 weeks, I just want to reiterate that because that really hits home. The reason it's 4 weeks and not say you can take a 2-week vacation and just put things on pause. The
That's
idea
what
here
people
is
do.
right. After 4 weeks, your business has to have gone through the whole cycle of client acquisition, client delivery. Like there's a whole cycle that you will have had to have gone through that is really saying something about how you've changed your business. And one of the changes you described, which kind of hit home for me, and I think it will for others as well, is the difference between scaling a business, which is
Oh
said
yeah.
far off too often today, and growing a business. Like this isn't about creating a recorded program. It can be, but it's not entirely creating a recorded program so you can deliver it in your absence. This is about like actually growing a business that can
Yeah.
run without you. Describe the difference between growing and scaling. I think that's useful.
Yeah, and to your point, scale is abused. Like everyone's like, I'm scaling, I'm scaling.
Right.
Here's the real simple definition. Growing is where you put in more effort, more resources to get more outcome. So you put in more to get more. Scaling is where you put in less resources, less effort to get more. So you put in less to get more. Scaling is all about leverage. What are the few things I can do that actually amplify the business? But most people are in the growth mentality. How can I work more hours? How can I do more volume? Can I introduce more variety? All these things are growth mentality, and we think that's scaling. It's not. So I invite everyone to think about the scaling mentality. How do you reduce your participation? We talked about it. Fractionalize yourself. Start inserting others to do work. As entrepreneurs, and we're all entrepreneurs in this space, self-employed, or if you already have a business with multiple employees, we're all entrepreneurs. The definition or the responsibility of an entrepreneur is not to do the job. The responsibility of an entrepreneur is to be the creator of jobs for others. We support the economy and then do the job that we love. I think people also get afraid saying, "Oh, I'm just going to create a business and I'm just going to walk away from it." Well, what do I do? That's not the goal either. The goal here is to have the ability to walk away from your business and it sustain, and the ability to insert yourself in the business in the way that gives you joy. So most people who are in the self-employed space, they do everything. The opening story I share is a woman who owns a daycare center. So she started off, it was just her out of her house, self-employed. She grew it. She has now, I think it was a school and 20 or 30 employees. And she sent me this note and it was devastating to read. She said she had double pneumonia at the time, was at the school cleaning it because she didn't have enough resources to do the work. So she had to do this work herself. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when she sent this email. And she's like, what does my life come to? Is life even worth living? That's the nightmare that can happen as we grow our business, ignoring the fact that it's about building efficiency. Because if there's dependency on you, especially critical dependency like that, then the business is going to collapse if just you fail to show. So we need to extract you actually to reinsert you.
Yeah, I think one of the mindset shifts that you offer, which I think implies a lot of us, like instead of, you said this was the reframe that changed everything for you, was shifting your mindset from needing to be the hardest working, most driven doer in your business to being a shareholder. Like that's a significant mindset shift that I think a lot of us self-employed need to think about. Like instead of being the hardworking doer, like how can you become a shareholder with vested interest in your business? I think that's a brilliant shift.
Thank you. I own 100 shares in Ford, so I'm not like a big investor in Ford. But what's interesting is Ford sends a quarterly distribution check. My last one was for $13 and change. When I got that money, I didn't like call the Ford factory and say, "Oh my gosh, I have to come down here and earn it." And I didn't call Ford and say, "Hey, can I return this money to plow it back in the business to grow the business?" What I did say is, taking risk. I hope the valuation of stock will go up, which in recent years or months doesn't seem to happen, but I hope the value goes up. But because I've taken risk and the value may go down, this is a reward for taking on that risk. That's what a distribution is. Well, if you're self-employed, you own shares. Likely you own 100% of the shares. You are the biggest investor in that business. And the business has a responsibility to reward you accordingly. But the other thing is interesting is that as a shareholder, I do have responsibilities back to Ford with the collective of other shareholders. I vote for new buildings and new structures. I influence who's on the board. They talk about implementing different strategies. They'll bring it to shareholders to vote on. It's strategic direction. And as the 100% shareholder of our business, our job is to give it strategic direction. Where do we want this business to head? And I think when you start calling yourself a shareholder, which by the way is very awkward when you're at the next cocktail party and someone's like, "What do you do?" And you say, "I'm a shareholder of this business."
Yeah.
But there's an identity shift.
Correct.
And what I'm encouraging people is stop being the heart of the business, doing all the work, become the soul of the business.
Yeah, I love that. So we're going to go in through the 3 steps framework of Clockwork, but I take a quick aside here because just this will hopefully help our listeners realize how stupid I can be. I just discovered this week I have been cashing a check monthly. One of those small dividend checks you talk about. I've been cashing one monthly for 22 years, and for whatever reason, this month when I got the check, I'm like, "Who is this from?" And I found out I own 200 shares of some company I invested in year 2000 and completely forgot about it. And I now have tracked it down, and I have like a fair amount of money sitting into an account. Like I had no idea. 22 years of cashing a monthly dividend check. And it finally occurred to me, I should ask, who is sending me this check? I was afraid they were going to want them all back. I'm like, I felt like Sophia in the Golden Girls when she kept getting all the Social Security checks. That was my thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, is somebody going to ask for this back? I've been cashing this check for 22 years, but it was legit.
I love that story. And that's what ownership is. Admittedly, I stop by a McDonald's every so often when I'm traveling. And I started a routine of asking the cashier, may I speak with the owner? Not because I have a complaint or anything. I'm just curious to see how a McDonald's operates. In 50 occurrences, not once was the owner ever there. There was the store manager,
Yeah.
but there was never the owner. And in one case, a teller said, "Oh, the owner, I think they were here a month ago to pick up the money." Like
Yeah.
that was literally the line, to pick up the money.
Yeah.
That's what true ownership
Absolutely.
is.
A friend of mine owns 7 McDonald's, I think he's up to now, and he's never at the actual store, but
But
he's buying them and opening them, and yeah,
and that's the vision, right?
exactly. Yeah,
So it's not like he's sitting back, and maybe he's achieved that status where he sits on the beach and sipping margaritas, and
pretty
that's
much.
wonderful. What I find for most owners is if we treat ourselves as a shareholder, not a participant in the business, but the visionary for it, we start working on the strategy where we
Yeah,
want to take it to.
I
Now,
love
listen,
it.
it almost sounds like I'm a hypocrite because I'm like, well, Mike, you're doing an interview, you do these things, you speak, you write books. That doesn't sound like an owner. I think as a business owner, we have the right to reinsert ourselves in the business in ways that give us joy. I love being a proponent or promoter of my brand, and I love writing books. So those are almost exclusively the two things I do now.
Right, and you're the face of the brand, right?
Yeah.
So if this is all that you did, I always say I made the most amount of money as a photographer in the years that I had 2 tasks. I showed up for the photo shoots and I sold my photographs because nobody could sell them as well as me. That's
Yep.
it. I had
Yep.
the most amount of time on my hands because I only had 2 jobs,
Yep.
right? I had 2 things I needed to
That's
do.
exactly how
They
you do
happened to
it.
be the only 2 only I could do those 2 things, and that's when I made the most amount of money and had the most amount of time. But I
And
wanna
I'd
get to
argue you
this
could
I
have
wanna
probably
get to
taken a
this
4-week vacation too without the business being
Oh,
compromised during it.
I took months off. Like it
Yeah.
was, I mean, I was a photographer, I photographed in the Northeast, which outdoors. So I didn't do any photography January through April. So I
Yep.
pretty much for 4 months was a slacker. I
There
just
you go.
made it up at the end of the year. All right. So these 3 steps
Yep.
to clockwork your business are align, integrate, and accelerate. So I kind of want to go through each of the 3 steps, kind of a highlight version of it with a line, for example, one of the things, and obviously I'd love this as the guy that wrote Lingo. I love the idea you say clarify who you serve, but you actually talk about this in a way that was so unique to me
Mhm.
that I think really gave credit to why you only want to serve your ideal customers. You say, and this is a quote of the book, your predictability grows exponentially when you do fewer things to the narrowest set of expectations.
Yeah.
Explain that. It's such a unique way of looking at the value of ideal customers.
Yeah, and I wonder if that adage of or safety and diversity harms us, right? So if you want to invest, buy all the stock, not don't just buy one because there's much more volatility. But in our ability to deliver a service or a product, the more variability there is, there's more potential for problems. Like manufacturers are a good example because we're all manufacturers. We don't make maybe goods, but we make reports or outcomes. We do produce something of value for customers. And if a manufacturer makes I got a mug here. My son goes to Rutgers, so it's a Rutgers mug. But if I made one mug that was black with Rutgers on it, and this is all I did, it's pretty easy to work on and produce. And if there's one problem, um, all the products are gonna have the exact same problem. So I just fix that one problem, and it goes through the line again. But the second I introduce, say, 10 colors, well, now I've multiplied the potential for problems by 10 times. Maybe the blue starts fading and the white isn't coming out white, it's coming out gray. And now we have to fix these problems, and it hurts the whole line because I got to stop the line to figure out gray. Why aren't we making the black mug? So the more variability we introduce, the more potential for problems, and it causes a bigger and bigger ripple effect. So manufacturers know reduce the product as much as possible, the variability, but it has to be a level that the customer's content. And customers may say, "I want something besides just that black Ford, Mister Henry Ford," and you have to start introducing more colors. Well, in our business, um, narrow down your offering to what your best customers want and serve that. But there's one other element. There's a concept out there called pivot. I don't like that word because
Me neither.
pivot only is half the formula. We do have to adjust our offering to match customers' desires, but it also must align with what our heart calls out to do. So don't keep on modifying and changing to serve your customers and you fall out of love with your business. That's the worst thing to do.
Yeah.
So it's always a heart check. Do I want to adjust the business and reduce variability, but also does it serve me in happiness by doing these fewer things better? And if that's true, now you've aligned with your heart and you'll excel.
Yeah, I
That's
think,
the other component.
and I think another way to reason the desire for diversity, even the wisdom to have a diverse business and keeping it narrow is the expectations piece. That's why I really honed in on that because you can serve a pretty diverse group of people that have similar expectations. I always say this about my
Yeah, it's
affluent
true.
clientele as a photographer. Like, I served an affluent clientele all over the US and a little bit in Europe, but there are expectations of that socioeconomic group that were alarmingly consistent, even though the culture was different. So you can actually serve a diverse. The key, though, is honing in on your ability to deliver on a narrow set of expectations. I love that you framed it that way. All right. So the other part of Align, this honestly, Mike, I read this. I think you can, and I hope maybe someday you could write an entire book about this one thing in Clockwork, which is determine your company's queen bee role, which I have already
Wow.
begun calling my business Beyonce, by the way.
I
I
love it.
immediately adopted that's my business Beyonce. But determining your company's queen bee role. Explain that. And I have to say, I don't know that I determined that for
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. And that actually may restrict growth for your business or any business that doesn't determine it. And it took us a while to get there ourselves. This is probably the second most important concept. So the 4-week vacation and the QBR are kind of fighting out for the number one spot of most important concepts. I use a technique called biomimicry. Study something in nature that works successfully. Mother Nature spent a billion years figuring it out. Translate it to business. And what I was trying to figure out was what makes organizations most efficient. Well, there's an organization, if you will, in bee colonies. They're extremely efficient in scaling and sustainability. Well, as I was studying them, I discovered that there is one activity that is the most important for the survivability of the beehive. It's not collecting nectar, it's not stinging someone to defend the hive. Those are all relevant, but the most important is the production of eggs. Bees live, depends on the species, but 4 to 6 weeks. Some of them live for maybe a year, but there's a lot, turnover in beehives. So the most important function is the production of eggs. Now, it happens to be in a beehive, there's one bee that produces it called the queen bee. Don't confuse the queen bee with being the most important bee, though. It's the role or the function of producing eggs. If that bee is failing to produce eggs, she is destroyed or consumed as a new queen bee is spawned. So it's the production of eggs. And every bee knows this. That if eggs aren't produced, we're all done. The colony dies. Bees will actually, they call it commit suicide. I don't know if that's the right choice of words, but they will actually leave the hive to perish if they're consuming too much food because we can't keep the egg production going. So nothing becomes secondary to that. The fact is, in our businesses, we all have a singular function that is the most important function. We need to identify it, and it needs to always be fed. For me, I promised my customers to simplify entrepreneurship. That's my big commitment or promise to customers. Then I asked myself, of all the things I do, what most delivers on that promise? I do speaking, I do one-on-one workshops and stuff, but I also write books. And of all those things, writing books is the most important. If I start to churn out like really shitty books, I think everything else goes by the wayside. So for me, the queen bee role is write extraordinary books. And that means there must be time allocated for it to do this. Now, here's the thing as opposed to a beehive where there's one bee producing, you can ideally have multiple bees. You and I both work with AJ Harper. She's worked with me too. I don't write a book alone. I wanted to expand faster in the books I did. Engaged derivative authors. So there's about 8 or 9 profit first books in circulation right now that I haven't done anything with besides giving my blessing and give some basic direction. But these authors produced them and they're spreading the word on profit first faster. So the key lesson here is write down all the things you do, but determine what one thing most delivers on the promise to your customers, because that's the survivability. That activity can never be compromised. That's the queen bee role for your organization.
Really interesting. Well, you've got me thinking. I mean, yes, the podcast came up for me. That is one thing. It's like,
Big.
is that my queen bee role? But definitely a lot to think about. And like I said, you can write a whole book on that alone because I think it's that important on
And there's
helping
a shortcut I'll
people.
give you just real quickly,
Awesome.
Jeffrey, is write down all things you think are the most important roles, then reach out to your best customers and say, of all these things I do here, which one matters to you most? And
Yeah.
that is likely your queen bee role.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Like I said, for you, for books, you put out a book every 18 months. So you're
Yep.
able, I couldn't imagine this. It's not likely that would ever, or, in the short term be my queen bee role, but beautiful. All right. So that's a line, right? That's a high level view
Yep.
of what it means to align your business, which is step number 1 of clockworking your business. Step number 2 of clockworking your business is to integrate. You talk about the 4 Ds that every business engages in these 4 elements. And I think everyone listening to this will know that this is recognizable, right? The
Yeah.
4 Ds are doing, deciding, delegating, and designing. As you said earlier, the
Yeah.
goal is you should be designing your business as the shareholder.
Right.
What intrigued me most, though, was the difference between doing and deciding
Oh
that
yeah.
you, as you said, we flip back and forth, and how we're not actually delegating
I
like we
know.
think we are. Like
We say
that
we
was
are,
a
we're not.
we're not. But I never had anybody explain the difference between, deciding and delegating and realizing you're not actually delegating. Explain the flipping between doing and deciding,
Yep.
and how deciding is not delegating.
Sure, sure. So doing is absolutely necessary. This is the deliverable side of the business or the activities that support the deliverables. So it's the majority of your business. And if you're a solopreneur, self-employed, solopreneur does have a negative connotation, but if you're self-employed, we do need to spend time in the doing phase and perhaps a significant amount. But in many cases, we overload that. We're always doing and we're never thinking about the designing, and that's a problem. So doing is the activity that delivers value to the customers or is the support infrastructure behind it. The deciding is where you are making decisions on what to do next for other people, usually in your organization. So this could be the virtual help or contractors or maybe a part-time employee. That type of stuff is similar to task rabbiting. Task rabbiting is where I say, Jeffrey, we need to get these 10 boxes packaged up. Could you ship them out? And I give it to you. And maybe you come back a minute later and say, hey, Mike, we don't have any packing material. What should I do? I'm like, oh, that's right. Do this. Go to UPS store and pick some up. You come back and say, oh, boxes are wrong size. What should we do? Oh, and all the decision making is mine, and all the task rabbiting is yours. And this is where most businesses are. The problem is there's a Hindu goddess named Kali, and Kali is that one god's face, a female face with 8 arms, and that's what we've become. One mind controlling all. What happens then is the work for the self-employed business operator drops significantly because all we're doing is thinking about everyone else's decisions or actions they need to take and telling them what to do. And then we do what's called the 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is the self-employed 9 to 5, where you really work from 9 o'clock at night 5 o'clock in the morning, because during the normal 9 to 5, you're deciding for everyone else. And the funny thing is, we call that delegating when it's not. Delegating is not the assignment of tasks, it's the assignment of outcomes. An outcome is where we have an agreement saying, Jeffrey, we have these 10 packages that need to go out to customers. Um, let's discuss why this needs to go out. These customers have ordered these; they're expecting them in a short period of time. What's your thoughts around that? Yeah, these things are fragile. We need to make sure they're protected, and yeah, they need to get there pretty quickly because this is we made a promise to get to them in 2 days. Once we understand what the outcome is, ship, timely, protected. Now I say, all right, Jeffrey, I hired you for that thing on your shoulders, that brain of yours. Get us there.
Yeah.
And what the natural tendency is of someone else is to start the work and then come back and say, oh, I have a question. This is where we need to bite our tongue, because if the question is like, I don't know what packaging to use, is a little bit fragile. If I give you the answer, I'm taking the decisions back and I become that Hindu goddess again. So the response is, what do you feel is best for us? And that's what we need to do. Please do that. And sometimes employees are going to make mistakes. I'm putting air quotes around this because it's really not a mistake. It's simply not our path of getting there.
Right.
It's their path. So it's just, it may be inconsistent with what we have done, but if it gets us to the right outcome, we're closer. And the biggest thing that comes out of this is empowerment. The employee says, oh, I can make decisions. Oh, there isn't a negative consequence if I don't follow the boss's rules, but as long as I get to where we need to go, then we're good. And that's what true delegation is. And when that happens, now you free the business up, because during the 9 to 5, the normal 9 to 5, employees are producing, using their minds to get us to the outcomes. And me, as one of the participants in my own business, employed to my own business, I can do the same thing as opposed to deciding for everybody else.
Yeah, this is a huge wake up call, and I hope everyone is taking this in. That, because I bet, as I did, you do your reality check. You're probably in deciding mode, and you're actually not delegating, right? Because you think you're delegating by giving somebody the task, but it keeps getting bounced back on you. Then you realize, with the goal being this 4-week vacation, clockwork your business, you realize you can't achieve that if you stay in deciding mode. It's not possible, because
You can't.
you can't. You have to delegate and be outcome
When I
based.
went on my first 4-week vacation, I was so afraid to go. And I realized at the end of the day, it was my ego. I thought my employees would say, Mike, you're going on vacation, but you're going to have all this fun time while we're working our butts off. You're really taking advantage of us. What I found out when I returned, I said, how'd you feel about me leaving? It was awesome. I felt more empowered than ever before. I can make decisions. I have control. I've never had a role like this. That's what this is. By delegating, you're empowering. By deciding, you're defeating, you're controlling.
I love that. And you just real quickly, because it can get more complicated, but I think it's smart to understand, like you actually break this up in percentages, these 4Ds. Can you
Yeah.
kind of touch on that real quickly, just so we have a
Yeah, for
realistic
sure.
vision of that?
Sure. It's based upon the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. But for an organization, about 8% of the time needs to be doing. Again, doing is delivery to your customers, the services or products that do that, but also the infrastructure behind it. So invoicing is a necessary component to make sure that money's flowing. That's part of the doing phase. That's where we spend the majority of the time. Deciding will happen. If I'm out doing some construction, we're building a building, and I'm the project manager there, and an employee comes and says, "Hey, this rivets, do we put it here or do we put those rivets there?" I probably should say, because I understand the scope of the entire business, put the rivets here. Don't say, figure it out on your own. Let's see how we do this, and the building
See if it
collapses.
stands, right?
Yeah. So deciding is necessary when someone understands a large scope and someone else doesn't understand the large scope, and you have to have that input. 8% of the time or so is on delegating. Delegating is the empowerment and assignment of outcomes. So that employee who comes and says, "Where do I put the rivets?" I may make the decision for them, but also is there an opportunity to further their education, to give them a better perspective so next time they don't need to come to me. That's where delegation comes in. About 10% of design time. Now, that's a lot of numbers and it's very particular. So the rough rule is 80% doing, 20% everything else, and it typically shakes out the way we want it to.
Yeah, and like I said, I just wanted you to touch on it because I think it is valuable to understand at least proportionately that yeah, you are going to be more doing this, the execution of what you do, but again, not doing it alone, but as a team. I think it's
Right.
just intelligent to understand the basis of it that way. So the third step is to accelerate. And what I love that you focus on in the accelerate phrase is metrics. So because to me, data enables you to accelerate. Like you
It
have
does.
to know the data in order to. So talk to us a little bit about what metrics you suggest we track.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the pulse of their business, just like the doctors. My father was rushed to the emergency room about 10 years ago, and the even though the problem was hallucinations and other things, uh, what they started off with was checking the blood pulse. He goes, "Listen, hallucinations we can take care of, and that's a state he can sustain. But if he has no blood pressure going on, the heart isn't beating, we're all done. So, what's the essence of the business? And always have your thumb on that pulse." Well, I remember I interviewed this guy, Kevin Fox, for Clockwork Revised and Expanded, and uh, he said, always try to find the simplest things in your business that give you an indicator there's a problem. Not necessarily nail the problem, but an indicator, because that will trigger investigation. Kind of like if the blood pulse is off, now we're going to investigate if there's a heart problem. You don't have all these monitors and you're not scoping the heart right away necessarily, but there's a lead indicator. Well, he happened to be a manufacturer again, but he was at a manufacturer that was welding stuff. And he said, and it was they had a lot of slowdowns in materials and they were waiting to get welded and so forth. He said the lead indicator, he called it the blue lights. Because if we see the flashing of the welding lights, the blue light, then we know they're welding. If there's no flashing of blue lights, we're not welding. That's the simple metric. And then they started to study this. So they noticed that in any given day of 8 hours, about 10% of the time, so whatever that works out to be minutes wise, there was actually blue lights flashing. So they went and they investigated and they found these welders who do the welding also had to do the staging, put stuff in jigs, the cleanup, the polishing, all this stuff. So they hired literally two teenage guys to put these parts into these jigs, roll them over, then the welder could weld. The welding went from 10% of the time to now 70 or 80% of the time.
Wow.
The production skyrocketed, but the metric was blue lights. And they said, if we don't see blue lights flashing, then we have to head to the floor and figure this out. So in our business, what are the indicators of the problem? For me, one indicator is how many people read a book or buy a book every week. So every week we get the reports in, we summarize the numbers, and we're evaluating them. And sure enough, there's been times we see dips, other times we see it take off. When either time there's a change from the norm, it's an investigation. One of the bigger dips we saw was COVID. COVID had a real impact. And the week after the shutdown started, the next week there was a drop in book sales. We're like, what is going on? So we started investigating this, and people were the readers saying, I don't want to read a book on profitability right now. I don't even know if I have a business. So we repackaged something. We made a book, an online only book called Recession Response, and that's how we bridged out of it, and we
Wow.
got back to normal. There was another circumstance where book sales started increasing significantly. Interestingly, also related to COVID. About 6 months to a year after COVID, then there was this bounce back saying, well, there's a great resignation going on. I'm going to start my own business. So then there was an interest in that. So we started focusing really on my books that are about the early stages of a business, the toilet paper entrepreneur, profit first a little bit, the pumpkin plan more. We focus there, and those books got more of a surge. So what's the indicator that points to the rough health of your business? And if it's outside of the realm of healthiness, I guess that's right, then you investigate it and try to take action.
Yeah, I think it's well, I think there's a few metrics that are worth watching. I love the idea of kind of knowing your key metric,
Yeah.
and honestly, and I've said this before about Facebook advertising. Like one of the benefits of running ads on Facebook is getting used to reading data,
Yeah.
because it's kind of fascinating to see where people fall off, right?
Yes.
You can have a really good ad and it can lead them to a page and people go to the page, but they don't actually hit the button that you want them to register for or to buy. And it's kind of becomes this fascinating data research to look at what causes people to fall off. So it's, to me, data allows you to see gaps, and then the gap can give you information. And I'll share on my photography business, and kind of compare my photography business for all those decades versus my current practice as a coach. My photography business, the number one metric, bar none, was our customer loyalty rate.
Mm.
All right, we called it CLR. Every year, because it was a business that was run so heavily on repeat business, our
Mm.
retention rate was about 70%. And that was key, because if 70%, let's say I would do 100 shoots, I usually do about 150 a year, but let's just round it off to 100. If I was doing 100 shoots and 70 of them were previous clients, I only had to spend money to get 30 more clients, right? So it helped us establish our marketing budget. But my feeling was, if people that already loved me were falling off, there's a bigger problem.
Yeah.
I may not know what it is at the moment, but there's something to unpack there. And
Yes.
honestly, probably the time in my trajectory as a photographer that I saw the biggest fall off was during the time of most growth, because the growth was the problem. The growth meant my clients could no longer call me up and get me as on a photo shoot in a week. I now had an 8-week waiting list. So I saw the greatest fall off. So while my business was increasing, I went into solving mode, because I didn't like the fact the
Yeah.
customer loyalty rate was dropping. Solve that, and we did. We solved it in a creative way, and boom, it goes right back up again. So that was the number one metric. Now, especially for the Self-Employed Business Institute, our number one metric the whole team knows is, does every student leave with absolute clarity on their core brand, their core message, and their brand
Mm.
message?
Mm.
Because that's the game changer, right? They come into the Business Institute doing a lot of the right things, feeling like they're a little bit all over the place. I want them to leave with absolute clarity on what they stand for, their core message, and how that translates into a marketing message, because that's the beginning of the hockey stick. When they got that, when they leave the Business Institute with that level of clarity, I know they're going to walk with their head high, and they're going to get into action, and they're going to see results they're going to thank us for in 6 months, right? So that's the metric. So while there's a lot of metrics, I love you're telling people to hone in on what's one metric that can tell you a lot.
And don't overwhelm yourself. Find that one metric, maybe find 3 to 5. The other mistake is, and I've done this, is let's have metrics for everything.
Yeah.
Then it gets clouded. Like what metric matters? So
Yeah.
so pick the 3 or 4, maybe 5. The other thing is, you may not pick them out perfectly from the get-go, and that's okay. Like, make your best guesses, like, these are indicators. Then when a metric kind of raises a hand and you investigate it, you may find, "Oh, I'm not actually not getting much value out of investigating this stuff." Then that metric's gone, and introduce something new. So over time, we kind of morph our metrics into the ideal 3 or 4 or 5, and then they change again. But that's how we do it.
Yeah, but again, I love that you tied the metrics into Accelerate, because to me, it's the reading of the metrics, understanding the metrics, the problems that the metrics might be introducing so that you can accelerate.
Correct.
Just beautifully done. So again, simple 3-step process in Clockwork: align, integrate, accelerate. It's doable. It's implementable. Again, I didn't read the original version, but I'll tell you, this version gets to the point. It gives you a framework that can help you grow your business, not scale it. But this is like solid growth in your business so that you too can take a 4-week vacation. I'm doing my first lighter version of this, which I set into plan before I even read the book. By this August, I'm taking. I've rented a house in Connecticut. I'm going
Nice.
up to Connecticut for the month. I've rented. It's my Hallmark moment. I rented an antique house in the middle of the woods with a babbling brook to begin work on my next book.
Oh, I love it. Which town are you going to?
Woodbury.
Oh,
Woodbury, Connecticut.
beautiful. Yeah.
Right, full of antique stores
Yeah.
and all
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Nice
stuff. And
shopping.
yeah, exactly. So it's it's, will I full blown be off? No, but I was very aware when I committed to this. This is me more than dipping my toe. I'm going up to my knees in heading in that direction, because all podcast episodes are already pre-recorded for that month. The Business Institute is in between cohorts, so I won't be coaching any students. There will really be a minimal amount of work that I will even need to do, and it's one step in the direction of a full blown month off every year, because I will have the team in place. So I love it. Mike, before I let you go, and this was just fantastic to introduce this Clockwork structure. Before I let you go, though, we have a compelling question for you, which is, what's one thing about you that says everything about you?
So I take a cold shower every morning for the last, I don't know, 200 plus days. And I think this is now my life standard. So no one knows that. I've never shared that before. But I think what it points to, the reason I do it is just invigorating. Um, and it feels healthy. Uh, but I can get into routines very effectively. And once I start something, I won't stop it. When I first became an author, that's 15 years ago, um, there was a day about a year into it, maybe a year and a half into it, I'm like, okay, I'm never quitting this. And I now I know I never will. It's when I commit to something, I'm in for life. Sometimes it takes me a little bit of time to get there, but I commit for life. So I'll probably be taking a cold shower every single day for the rest of my life. And by the way, I know you're in Florida. You can take cold showers in Florida. I was traveling in Florida, and yes, the water temperatures are even cold there on the cold setting, even though you have such a warm climate.
Yeah, well, I know it's recommended for health reasons, and I take the hottest shower imaginable, but I can see how, knowing your personality, I can see how it does say a lot about you. Like, you're all in, right?
All right. Oh,
You
and it's
don't
painful.
mind.
It's painful. And
Yeah,
listen, and I also know most people won't do it.
yeah,
In anything I do, I'm like, there's going to be a lot of competition in the beginning because it's the flash in the pan. Everyone's excited. Go to the gym on January 1st, then go again on August 1st.
right.
And I'm the guy who says, okay, I'm going to be here August 1st. And that's just who I am. And so that's why who I'm with the cold showers. I know most people won't do it. I think there's a good health benefit, and that's why I'm sticking with it. But also, I just want to point out, if the day comes that I'm like, this is not healthy or not good, I'm dropping it immediately.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, it does represent who you are, because you're not only just all in for yourself. Like, that's how you are in the world for us
Oh, thank
as
you.
entrepreneurs and self-employed. But like, you are all in on absolutely making entrepreneurship simple
Thank
and
you.
eradicating entrepreneur poverty. Like, you're all in
Thank you.
on that. So it is representative of what you do. So tell us how we can find out more about Clockwork.
The best place to go is clockwork.life, Life. The reason I chose that domain was because clockwork.com was taken. And this is a lifestyle. It's a shift for business owners. There's actually sections for employees too. So if employees, it may be a
Yeah.
good read for them. But go to clockwork.life.
Awesome. Well, I encourage everyone to do that. And, again, if you feel any resistance, like I guess I probably did, which is why I didn't read the original version, because I didn't see it possible. Quite honestly, I figured it was going to push some buttons for me. It's going to challenge me in ways that I didn't want to face. But I'm so glad I read this version of it, this revised and expanded version of it, because I take your word on it. It is simplified, because you can do this. And I really, really agree with your overall premise that your business, I mean, well enough about well-being and self-care, right? We know that. But your business truly benefits. Your team, even your virtual team, they really do benefit from you removing yourself for a while and giving them the empowerment and autonomy that they strive for as humans too. So I think you're doing yourself a whole lot of good. So Mike, thank you so much for being here. It's really been great.
Jeffrey, thank you so much.
And as always, remember, you may be in business for yourself, but you are not in business by yourself. Be your best self, be proud, and keep changing the world.